The drama reportedly crossed the $100 million mark worldwide, making it one of A24's biggest commercial successes to date, and one of the strongest original film performances Zendaya has delivered outside of an existing franchise. So this isn't a failure story. At least not on the surface. But underneath that result is a different story. One about a studio that spent years burning through tens of millions of dollars on creative bets that didn't pay off, watched its identity get pulled in contradictory directions, and quietly rebuilt itself into something that looks increasingly less like the A24 that audiences fell in love with. The drama is the product of that reinvention. And understanding why it exists tells you something genuinely interesting about where one of Hollywood's most distinctive studios is heading. A24 was founded in 2012 with a simple and genuinely unusual proposition: give genuinely distinctive filmmakers the resources and freedom to make genuinely distinctive films, then market those films in ways as creative as the films themselves. The early results were extraordinary. The Witch, Ex Machina, Moonlight, which won Best Picture, Hereditary, Midsommar, Uncut Gems, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which swept the Oscars and crossed $100 million worldwide. Film by film, A24 built a brand identity unlike anything else in the industry. Director Barry Jenkins, whose Moonlight was an A24 release, perhaps described it most precisely. That's why everyone says, I know what an A24 film is, but no A24 film is like any other. That paradox, a consistent brand voice that somehow accommodated wildly different creative visions, was A24's core asset. Audiences didn't just go to see specific A24 films. They went to see A24 films. The logo became a quality signal. And for about a decade, that signal was remarkably reliable. Then the economics started to catch up. The problem with backing genuinely uncompromising creative visions is that some of them lose a lot of money. Ari Aster had delivered two of A24's most commercially successful horror films, Hereditary and Midsommar, both made on modest budgets and both performing well beyond expectations. His reputation was, by 2023, essentially untouchable within the A24 ecosystem. So when he came to the studio with Beau Is Afraid, a 3-hour surrealist odyssey starring Joaquin Phoenix, the green light, in retrospect, was probably inevitable. Against a reported production budget of $35 million, Beau Is Afraid couldn't return half that investment with a global haul of just $11 million. Reports suggested A24 lost tens of millions on the film, with some estimates placing losses above $35 million, though precise loss calculations are difficult to confirm given ancillary revenue and streaming factors. What's less disputed is that it became the biggest bomb in the studio's history by a meaningful margin. Aster joked in interviews that he was surprised the studio agreed to fund the project at all, which is either charming creative honesty or a sign that something had gone wrong in the internal risk assessment process, and possibly both. Beau Is Afraid was the most visible failure, but it wasn't isolated. In 2025, Opus, starring Ayo Edebiri and John Malkovich, reportedly grossed well under $3 million in total box office revenue against a budget that, per various reports, was in the $10 million range. Death of a Unicorn opened to around $5.7 million domestically and struggled to recover its reported budget. Later that year, Eddington, Aster's follow-up with Emma Stone and Pedro Pascal, also reportedly underperformed significantly relative to its production cost, though exact figures from reliable trade sources haven't been fully confirmed. These aren't catastrophic individual losses in isolation, but they accumulate. And they accumulate in a context where the studio's valuation had recently reached a scale that made the old model harder to sustain. The numbers in early 2023, the Manhattan-based equity firm Stripes paid a reported $225 million for less than 10% of A24, implying a total studio valuation in the range of $2.5 billion. That number changed everything. According to reporting by The Wrap, A24 was actively seeking action in big IP projects as part of a larger strategy of de-emphasizing the traditional character and auteur-driven dramas that had been the studio's bread and butter since founding. The source quoted in that same report was direct about the underlying logic. The auteur business is a lousy, high-risk business that does not attract potential buyers. That's a big problem if you're looking to sell or seek additional investment. A source close to A24 disputed the characterization, telling The Wrap the studio would still focus on auteur work, but would be doing more and widening the aperture. That framing, not abandoning the identity, just expanding around it, is the version the studio has maintained publicly. But the films that followed suggest the aperture widened considerably. The commercial pivot didn't happen overnight, and it didn't produce uniform results. But a pattern is visible in retrospect. Civil War 2024, Alex Garland's reported $50 million action epic set in a near-future America, crossed approximately $127 million worldwide. Its $50 million budget sat well ahead of A24's previous most expensive production, and its performance appeared to validate the argument that the studio could operate at a higher budget tier without sacrificing its creative distinctiveness. Garland's vision was uncompromising in ways that studios typically won't allow. Politically ambiguous, visually brutal, narratively unusual, but it was packaged in a way that general audiences could engage with. That combination became something of a template. Then came Marty Supreme, Josh Safdie directing Timothée Chalamet in a ping-pong drama that sounds implausible on paper, but reportedly performed strongly enough to place among A24's highest-grossing releases to date. The star power was undeniable, but the film retained the specific Safdie texture, the anxiety, the propulsive editing, the lived-in detail that distinguished it from a conventional prestige production. It was star-driven without being creatively hollow. The drama follows that same logic, pushed further in the commercial direction. Directed by Kristoffer Borgli, whose previous A24 film Dream Scenario was a cult success, the film stars Zendaya and Robert Pattinson, and according to available reporting, explores themes involving personal conflict and contemporary social tensions. On paper, it reads as a romantic comedy. In practice, it appears to be something considerably stranger, which is perhaps why the marketing had to work as hard as it did. One of the most instructive things about the drama is not the film itself, but how A24 reportedly chose to announce it to the world. According to available reporting on the campaign, the studio placed a fake engagement announcement in the Boston Globe, revealing character details for Zendaya and Pattinson's roles as if they were real people. The campaign was described as generating immediate buzz, not through expensive ad buys, but through clever contextual content that invited discovery. Marketing that felt less like selling and more like sharing an inside joke with millions. If those reports are accurate, this is A24's marketing philosophy at its most effective. And it helps explain why the drama appears to have outperformed comparable films with larger marketing budgets. The studio still knows how to make a cultural moment out of a release in ways that feel organic rather than corporate. That instinct appears to have survived the commercial pivot, and it may be the most valuable thing A24 has managed to preserve through the transition. The honest question sitting underneath all of this is whether A24's evolution represents smart adaptation or gradual erosion of the thing that made it worth caring about. Vulture's Sam Sanders framed the tension precisely. When moviegoers gush over an A24 film, it can be hard to tell whether they're more excited about the A24 part or the film part. That ambiguity has always existed to some degree. But as the slate moves toward films where star casting is doing more of the work, the question becomes harder to dismiss. The drama received broadly positive reviews, solid rather than rapturous, and performed well largely because Zendaya and Pattinson are compelling together, because the marketing was inventive, and because the film is reportedly an entertaining and genuinely unusual watch. Whether it will be remembered the way Moonlight or Hereditary or Uncut Gems are remembered is a separate question that only time answers. What's clear is that A24 can no longer afford to operate purely on creative instinct at the budget levels its valuation now demands. Flops like Death of a Unicorn and Opus are, as one observer noted, cleverly swept under the rug as to not tarnish the brand. But they still cost money. And money lost on Beau Is Afraid is money that can't be risked on the next genuinely unusual vision from an unproven filmmaker. The millions Hollywood burned to get to the drama, on 3-hour edible fever dreams, on horror comedies that found no audience, on ambitious projects that alienated viewers, weren't wasted in the traditional sense. They built the credibility that made audiences trust the A24 name enough to show up for a mid-budget romantic comedy about difficult contemporary themes. The brand absorbed those losses and converted them into cultural capital. Whether that capital is now being spent wisely or quietly cashed out is the more interesting question about where A24 goes from here. What do you think? Has A24 made the right call pivoting towards star power, or is this slowly becoming the thing it was always supposed to be an alternative to? And did you see the drama? Let me know in the comments.